So these are some of the slides for the Monday lecture, which is really just to guide you in relation to where you are this week. So this week is your final design week, so technically you're not really doing that much more designing, you're actually just choosing for definite what your final design is going to be. I think now moving forward, so if you look at it, we've got development, refinement, and concept to final design is what you would have been working on up to this point. And from this week onwards, you need to take one idea forwards as your final concept. And that can be a combination of the things you've been working on as a team. If you haven't started making yet to prove your idea, you need to do something very quickly. It's going to be very, very hard for you to prove your final design in the presentation if you've just done everything off drawings and sketches. You've got to prove the principle, and we've been talking about this now for a number of weeks. You have to make prototypes and test them out to find out which ones make sense in order to be able to refine your concepts. So in weeks 11, 12 is the last couple of weeks of design and development, and your exam week, or study week as it actually is going to be week 13 is when you're going to do your presentations. So up to this point, 11 and 12 is your final design and detail development, and collation for your submission will be these 2 weeks. And this week now you're kind of starting to pull the whole project together and decide what your final design is going to be. So up to this point you would have come in last week and you've gone off and done variations of your own concepts. So each member in the team would have took a variation of the final design that you decided on last week, and you've been working on details of that. And what you're going to do this week is you're going to come back together and present to the others in your team your variation or your version of what you think this final design needs to look like in terms of the detail, the shape, the form, how the user engages with it, and so on. And then as a team, what you'll discuss is maybe there's one of them that is really good, maybe there's a combination of a couple of them you can take things from. Effectively, by the end of the session, you want to be in a position where you have one concept which is completely done and completely finished, and this is your final design. That's what your team project's going to be, and this is going to be then at the end of a long process of research and ideation, and then sharing ideas and brainstorms and filtering down and sharing details and filtering down again to arrive you at this kind of team decision that this is the version that you need to take forwards. And you need to kind of know why you're taking that forwards as well. It's no good just sort of picking it and saying I like this one. You need to actually have a bit of rationale, a bit of thinking in relation to why you're doing that and what the reason is. And the reason for that is that when you come to do your presentation and talk to us, we'll be asking you questions about what your selection process was and how you managed it and how you arrived at this final version and how this final version meets the brief and how it meets the user's needs. So therefore the concepts you select, you need to kind of take those things into consideration so you can defend your work when we ask you questions about it. So this is kind of where you are this week, and then moving forward from that, effectively you're then sharing tasks, unless of course you have a major amount of work left to do on it, which means you have to manage your time slightly differently. In terms of your final design, choosing which one to take forward, if this was your final design here, there's a couple of areas you can look at, and the most obvious one is the project scope and brief, so which one meets the requirements of the brief or the specifications or the user needs. The other one is looking at innovation and creativity, so what concept are most interesting in response to the problem that you have. Is there a wild card concept in there? Is there something cool in there that's really like wicked and far out there that's really different? Maybe you can take something from that. Practicality, if you're actually looking at prototyping things, which you should be, then obviously it's the concept that you've proven through testing, the one you can't fail, which seems to imply that it works the best. You might have actually gone and spoke to users about it, which means you can validate which concept works really well, and this evaluation that you've gone through can justify your choices. So there's the practicality end of it as well, but also you've got to think about feasibility too. In terms of, you've got 3 weeks left. If your concept's really far out there and there's a massive amount of work to do, you might have to either rein in what your expectations are of the deliverables for that, or basically choose a concept that you think is more manageable and makeable in the 3 weeks you have left. And also think about what's feasible and realistic in terms of technology. If it's a time-travelling device and it pops to the future to get a cup of tea and comes back again, then it's probably not really going to make a lot of sense. So you need to be realistic in terms of the technology in there, because it will only strengthen your concept more, but also maybe help you to choose which concept you move forwards with. So these are kind of 4 areas of things that you can kind of use as criteria for assessing which is the concept is the best one. And you can do that through a matrix, or you can do it through discussion, but at least if you know why you've chosen your final idea, or a combination of the concepts you create in this session this week and what makes that based on these things, you are able to defend your work more in your final presentation. When we ask you questions about how have you proven this through testing, yes or no, why did you choose it? Well, it meets the user needs and it's makeable within the time remaining, it's realistic in terms of technology. These are things to be able to defend yourself a little bit, so things you have to think about. Be realistic in regards to what you can actually achieve. Be careful if it still looks like it needs a lot of work. If you have a lot of directions left, pick the most which is most developed, so you're already fairly certain that it's a good concept. Choose something fun, because you have to enjoy actually finishing up the project as well, and try your best to decide on a final design this week. I was going to say that if your team really does need to do further work on the idea this week, and you really have to do more, be very careful, because you're eating into the last 3 weeks you have left, and we're only going to recommend to you the schedule we give you. How you actually work in practice is down to you. We're really giving you a guide essentially on what to do and how to do it, and how you actually put that into practice is down to your team. So if you choose, for example, for the next week that you're going to continue to work on your design work, that's your choice. If you want to do another week's worth of detail on it, that's fine by me, but you're the one that has to make that decision. If you do choose to develop the idea further, be very specific as to what you need to do, when you need to do it, and how you need to do it, and have a fixed deadline agreed in the team for when that's done. So it might be that, say, for example, one person within the team says, I'm going to continue to develop the detail on the grips and the handle of the strap design, while other members in the team are working on other things to hand in for this project. And you agree upon what they're going to work on. So it might be the clips, it might be the straps, it might be the way it just genuinely looks, or the colours, for example. And I'm going to take 2 days to do that, and by Thursday, for example, I'll have that done, and then we can finish up. The reason you need to have this done is because you need to make a model, and in order to make a model you need a 2D technical drawing, and in order to have a 2D technical drawing you need to have a finished concept. So the quicker you can get your concept finished and finalised in terms of detail, in terms of what it looks like and how it's held and how it functions, the quicker you can move forward with everything else. But the time is really down to you and how you manage it. Okay, so you've really got two options this week in your group. Option one is use the lab to decide as a team on the final concept, what the look is like, how the functionality works, the size, decide on important details, use engagement, etc. Design in the class if needed. We'd be expecting to see you actually effectively drawing in class on paper, because that's what designers do. So if you have a big pad of paper out in front of you, maybe actually what you do is sketch out and draw out what the final design is and finalise that in the class, and then when you separate this week and go independently working again, you'll know what you need to do. The other option is that option two is that you use the lab to continue to work on the final concept criteria in relation to what final details we need to put together, discuss the factors on the concept still needs to address if there are any, and be specific about what still needs to be done, and discuss important details, use engagement, etc. What you could do is delegate a number of people, 1 or 2 members in the team, to continue to work on this for a limited amount of time under pressure. So have deadlines and expectations if you do that option, but be careful in terms of managing your time. I've done a chart here to kind of imply what I think you should be doing. We've worked out the type of tasks you need to finish and the amount of time you need to do them in against the time you are allotted in this course. So for example, in week 9 last week, I was recommending that you spent about 4 hours each approximately on your concepts for your final design, and about 3 hours each on your appraisal, working on project weeks 1 to 3 for your appraisal. It's important that you don't get behind with that, because as things get busy towards the end of the semester, towards the end of this term, you really don't want to be trying to catch up on that appraisal, and you want to be trying to put into place right now the template to create it and all of the background work you need to help you write it. You can't rush that. It's 40% of your mark for your personal appraisal, and so it's going to be a big chunk out of your project if you don't get on top of that now, and you certainly don't want the stress towards the end of the semester. In week 10, things change a little bit. So this is where you're dividing your tasks, so communication within your group is key, really. So again, you've got 3 hours on your appraisal this week, project weeks 4 to 6, for example, but now you're splitting on average a team of 4 up. So what you've got here is a team report which we need to do, around 4 hours approximately on your team report needs to be spent, and underneath this I've kind of indicated what might need to be done this week. This is just a guide. You don't have to do what I've written, but it's just to imply to you what you might need to do. So in terms of the report, you'll be compiling all the report material, building a template, starting to populate the contents as a whole document, basically getting everything together that you think you need to write the report from the group. One person takes command over this. Someone else is responsible for the 2D technical drawing of your final design. So this is why you need to have a final design done, and they might be looking at dimensions or sort of starting to get that into CAD or hand drawn if you want, but the purpose of doing that is so that you can complete the 2D technical drawing and then give that to this person here, and this person is going to start working on the final model. So in the terms of the sort of task you might be doing on the final model is thinking about a model making plan, or even prototyping still if you need to, starting to gather materials and resources. So if you're doing paint and foam, you need to make sure you've got all those in place, or starting to actually build the final model. We want something that's high quality, but you need to plan that in terms of how you're going to build it. To do that, you need a technical drawing, and you're going to need to look at getting your resources as well. In terms of this person down here, we've got like a spare person this week, so I've just called it Gun for Hire. They're available to continue on working on design details, or if the final design is complete, double up with someone else. So this person could be working on the final design detail, or actually helping out in the model, or helping out the technical, or helping out the team report. So this week you're not too heavily laden, but make the most. If you've got a team of 5 or 6, then you're on to a win. It means you can double up on some of these things and take the pressure off someone in the group. In week 11, things have changed a little bit. The 2D technical drawing should be done by now because the model is going to be in play. So whoever's doing the model is now building it, making sure the process is correct, materials on hand, 2D drawing and plan are accurate, and they're building the model. And because they're building the model, we've got someone else down here who was without a task last week, and now they're starting to think about the presentation. So next week we'll talk about presentation in the lecture. This person here will be pulling all together the materials needed for drafting up the template, composition, building final slides. And then we've got 2 people here working on the report, and that's because as we move forwards, as of next week, as part of your design and detail end of the project, you're going to have to start thinking about materials and process and manufacture. So one of the members of the team can be thinking about background information for this, and the other person can still be responsible for writing up each of the weeks that have happened within the project throughout the design and creative phase. So 2 of you can sort of be sharing tasks there. One of you be finding out new information, the other person be writing up what's been done already and putting those 2 together. And I'll show you an example of that towards the end of the lecture. In week 12, things continue. So the person, again, that was responsible for the team report here is compiling all the report materials, making sure details in the appendix is done, the content's correct, printing and binding is booked, and responsible for pulling the whole thing together on time. And then we've got the other person down here again looking at presentation, final images, hero shots. So this person might have to start taking pictures of the model that's been completed and bringing those boards into Photoshop and actually putting that together as part of the presentation and part of the report as well. And the person who's building the model, for example, if the model is not done already, is also sort of helping out, taking time, taking pictures and putting the presentation together, helping out with hero shots, etc. This person again is free and available to contribute to the final team push. This is just a guide, and in terms of what your team need and how you do it, depends on the group. How you manage your time as a group and divide the tasks between you is up to you, and it's really just down to being communicative within the group and how you work together. But if you do pull together on a team of 4, if you're on a team of 3 you can get by, because effectively in this week we've got someone spare, and effectively in this week we've got someone spare. So in a team of 3 you can potentially actually do this each week. You'll have a busy week in week 11, and then in a team of 3 you'll be okay here as well. So yeah, you'll just have to work that out as you move forwards. In terms of the marks, I want you to pay attention to this. Don't worry too much about the percentages, because they're just percentages. What's important is that you do a really good piece of work. In terms of the making, if you look at this, in terms of concept generation and development, we did mention this weeks ago, that you have to, discovery of concept backed up by iterative practical experimentations. If you're not doing iterative practical experimentations, then you're not going to be able to evidence any of the actual development of the concept beyond just a sketch. You need to start making things physically and prototyping things out, and then showing how you've learned from that. Part of doing that feeds back into your research. So if you've actually done some prototyping and then tested it with a user, that then comes back to the research, because you're looking at from communication of insights, reflective learning from engagement. So this is part of your reflective learning here, where you've actually done some iterative practical experimentations, and then you've made sense of what you've learned from that by testing it with the user, and that becomes reflective, and that then comes back into the concept. So these two kind of work together here. So you need to be careful of the terminology here and the things we're asking you to do. We want you to get practical, we want you to get making, and we want you to do further research as well as part of your project. If you're not doing that, then that's your choice, but I wanted to make you aware of what these things are here. Good detailing in the final part of your report, production feasibility, justified proposals for delivery is kind of where you're talking about how the idea of the concept meets the user's needs. It has to reflect the brief. And also with your personal appraisal, you need to be reflecting about what you've learned and where and why, which is why you need to get on top of this and your presentation. So just have a look through that as well, just to remind yourself of what you need to do. And I gave you an example the other day. This is an example of how you might set out your project appraisal. So this is like week 6, concept, ideation and design. So here I've got a couple of images here of what might happen in your lab, and then an image down here of what might have been happening from you that week in terms of your sketches. And on the right hand side here, I've got 4 questions that you need to answer. So what did you do this week? Tasks, actions, outputs, and describe what you did, why this activity was relevant to the project, discuss it. Difference between describe and discuss is describe is where you're talking about the things that happened. Step 1, step 2, I was responsible for this, I was responsible for that. And discussing is how you feel that it contributed. Why is it relevant? What did you get out of it? What did you learn about it? This is the personal part, like first hand. Third hand is kind of like what was done and what you did. First hand is kind of writing about what you got out of it. And this is the approach you need to take. And it's the same down here. How did your input contribute to the project? And what did you personally learn through this week? And you can decide what that learning is. But we're trying to get you to talk and think a little bit about what went wrong and why, and how you fixed it, how you responded to the challenges. So you need to do one of these for each week of your input in the group. Now, once you've got a template built up like this, you can refer to the documents that we gave you before about your team weekly record, and you can use that to write this. This is still worth 40% your appraisal, so you should have around 12 pages of that in total. And obviously you can put your own work in here that you did as part of the group to evidence your own contributions. You can also appendix in the back of this any work which you didn't want to put in here, any further design work or sketches or things that you took part in, you can appendix at the back of this, and then you can kind of reference here. So for the aim of original sketches, see appendix 1.2, and you can have further appendix sketches at the back if you want. In terms of your report, so the other thing is the team report that someone has, or 2 people have to be responsible for putting together. I've broken down here the kind of chapters that you'll have within your report. So there's 3 main chapters. One of them is research, one of them is concept generation, and one is detail and finish, which you're working on now. The research and scope part of it has already been done. You've already written that. That was written at the end of week 4 and handed over to the other team, so you swapped it. So this has already been completed. In terms of your concept generation, there's a template which I'm going to show you now that you need to fill out, which is very, very similar to this one for your appraisal. It basically captures what you do each week, which I think is around here. So this is your design report template that comes in for this chapter here. So just describe what happened for each of the weeks between, say, weeks 5 and 9 in relation to your design work as a team. You're not talking about yourself, you're talking about the group. You need to be concise when you fill it out and include images that are relevant to each of the weeks. So here, I've given you another example. So in week 9, it was final design, discussion and development. And the group were looking at user engagement and bag function, for example, and a Bluetooth concept. So here I've got a couple of images of what the group potentially were working on that week and a description of what they are down below. But maybe someone else in the team was also working on some physical prototypes, and that was important to mention as well, because it's part of the development of the work that's really, really key, maybe one concept in particular. So I've put down here an image of the prototyping of that bag that might have been going on, and a description of it here as well. And then there's 3 main questions to answer at this stage within the design and development part of the report. What was the project objectives this week for the team? So here you just talk about what the team was doing this week generally. What were your objectives for this week? What did you need to achieve? And what was the final output or direction from this week's work? So you can talk about what actually happened. So here I'm just talking about the ideas for the sketches. So one idea was to Bluetooth microchip the bag so that parents could be informed when the child left school and potentially make the backpack trackable. So here I'm sort of discussing or describing actually what's actually happening in these sketches that's happened this week, the outputs of the week, the direction from this week's work. I'm just describing it. And at the bottom here you can just put a little bit in terms of what was challenging this week and how you overcame it. You can just discuss that. Now if you filled out your weekly record sheets, you should have that anyway to refer to, because this is why you were doing it, and you should be able to write out about the output that came out of last week's work, because you were writing about that in your weekly record sheets as well. And you should know what your objectives were for this week for the team, because you were kind of writing about that too, and it's also part of the lecture series. So all of this should be quite easy to write, as long as you were keeping a record of what you did with the information and the documents that we provided you with. And all you have to do is populate it with the work that was done and just reference it as part of your description here. Now if you've got extra work that you want to put in, again you can just appendix it at the back. Maybe in week 9 there was quite a lot of work done that you can't mention everything here, but you can refer to it in the appendix. So you can appendix things at the back of the A4 document and just talk about it here so we can go and have a look at it. Okay, so that's your concept generation, weeks 5 to 9, you can write about that. When you're coming down to doing the detail and the finish part, which you're working on now, which if you come back to these slides here, some of you are starting to work on the detail and the finish part here, like the final model and the presentation and the team report here, looking at manufacturing, materials and process, for example here. What you're going to write is something that looks a little bit like this. So this week's a little bit different. When you're coming onto the detail, the final design detail part, here you might be talking about, say, the manufacturing choice of method that you've chosen, which might be injection molding for certain parts, so you can sort of show a diagram of that up there if you want, and why it's been chosen. And when you're talking about your material selection, you can show some images of the material selection down here and also why it's been chosen. And then on the right hand side, in these last weeks, there's a couple of things to talk about. What were the project objectives this week for the team? So that's exactly the same as what you were doing before for this one here. Exactly the same, nothing's changed. But now what's changed is when you're writing what was the final output described. Now when you come into these last 3 weeks of the project, you're not creating so much, you're not creating things in terms of like you would have been in design, so you're not kind of discussing what was happening as much. What you're doing is just describing the detail behind things. So material selection and why this is appropriate for our design, process choice and why this is appropriate for our design, mold choice and why this is appropriate for our design. They don't have to stick to these titles if you don't want, but these are the kind of things we're looking for. So another week, in week say 12, you might be talking about unique selling point, for example, as well, and why that's important. And you can format this how you want, but this is kind of giving us the detail behind the project. It's the kind of like the part that makes it convincing that you've thought it well through. And again at the bottom, a little bit about what you overcome and what was challenging about the project. So if we come back here, I've listed down here a few things for you to write about. So you've got down here, say, detail and finish, and you're looking at it maybe incorporating materials, process, mold pattern, USP, market suitability, why the user is appropriate, final design details, in terms of how it looks, any further details. You did 2D technical drawing, and of course part of that will be your final images and hero shots. So all of this you can just put in, you can just list these if you want. You can just list some of the things in there. Some of them need more description than others, some of them need less description than others, and you don't just have to stick to one page. For week 11 you could do 2 sets of pages if you wanted to for week 11. So in week 11 you might write on one of them, you might write about materials, process and mold choice, and then in week 11 you might also write about, for example, unique selling point, and the 2D technical drawing might go in here as well, and you might talk about user specification and market needs, things like that, why it suits the market. You can talk to us about this as we move forwards. We'll answer more questions as we move forwards, but it should be fairly self-explanatory once you get into it. You'll need to write a project introduction to the report that explains what the project's about. There's a few things down here to think about as well: who the team is, team introductions, team skills background, and a project conclusion. So how you feel the final project answers the brief, how you feel the final project works well for the user and why, and a little bit about the team in terms of what you could have done differently and what you could have done better when you're working as a group, and of course your appendix. So there's quite a lot of work here. This report for the group is quite a chunk of work because you've got to basically capture 2/3 of the work you've done into one report. So this is quite a bit of work. Now you've already done the design sketches that would have gone here. So all you have to do now is make your template up and drop in bits and pieces into each week that you feel is relevant from each week, and then write it up. So quite a bit of work to do there, but I think in the time that you've got, around 4 hours each week between say 2 of you, that's 8 hours a week between 2 people writing this up, should be fine. If you come back to the schedule that we had before, here, so you've got someone here doing some of the work on the background materials manufacturing process and someone else putting everything together here as well. You've got basically 8 hours between 2 people a week to put this together. Now you could write the whole document in 8 hours if you worked hard enough with someone else. So effectively you've got enough time if you manage your team properly. Okay, so there are your templates. Here's some examples. I haven't written this out because that's for you to write out. What I have done is I've written this out in my own writing here to give you an indication of what I would do. And lastly but not leastly, in terms of final team presentations in week 13, which is the study week, these are your stream times at the top. So Tuesday at 9, Wednesday at 9, Wednesday at 2, Friday at 9. And underneath is going to be your time for your presentation. So for the Tuesday at 9 AM group who's doing the torch, your time for presentation is Tuesday the 4th of June between 1 and 3, for example. And the Friday class, yours is Wednesday the 5th of June between 4 and 6. So what I've done here is giving you a slight indication of what we're looking for. So there's a team presentation, which is a digital copy. We're looking for a bound team report, which I've just discussed, a bound personal appraisal from each of you, which is your own appraisal, finished final model, which looks really nice, and of course a bound copy of all team design work. So what we want you to do is any sketch work, any storyboards you've done, any sort of model processes where you've taken some photographs of building models or pictures of testing out the models, print everything out, scan in your own sketches. So we don't want the originals, we want copies, only the good stuff, and put all of your project work together as a bound document for the team. And then as we're reading your team report, if it's not in the appendix, which it probably should be if it's really important, but we can just also look here at the team report. It just gives us something nice to look at where we've got a team report, an appraisal, a model, and this nice A3 bound book of a copy of all your sketch work as well, just to cap it all off. And of course when we do a presentation or a show and we put your model out for people to come and see, they can sort of flick through that and have a look at the work that you've done as a group, which is really nice to do. It's good practice. So there's quite a lot to chew through there. I'm going to talk to you about it in your labs. Come and talk to me if you're not too sure, and next week we'll talk about your presentation. And next week I want you to bring with you, if you don't want to bring them this week, you can wait till next week, have a look at your appraisals in class, and I wouldn't mind having a look at the reports as well. So if you can bring to your labs this week a draft template for your appraisal, so I know you've got that done, you can effectively use that draft template for your report for the group as well. You can just use the same template to cut some corners here if you want, but I would like to see drafts of them in the labs so I know that you're starting to pull things together. Okay, and that's it. So good luck. I'll talk to you about it in your labs each this week and next week. And one more thing to actually say, and I said this to the group originally this morning, I think you're actually all doing fantastically well. I think that the pressure that you're under in terms of work is, from what I'm hearing from people, is quite high, and that you're managing it fairly well. But I just wanted to say that I'm really impressed with how well you're all doing with the things that you're doing. And I think the designs that you're coming up with are good. I think it's really interesting work. Your drawings are getting better, your making's getting better, you're all turning up, you're paying attention, you're getting on with things really well, and you're delivering as well, which is really impressive. I think with the amount of tasks you've got on over 4 different papers, 4 different courses, and in 4 different groups, I think in all fairness you're handling it brilliantly, and it's really impressive to see, and it is noticed and we have recognised it. We do think you're doing a fantastic job, and the absolute truth is that we're really excited to see just what these teams deliver in the presentation week, and we're excited for a couple of reasons. The first one is because we know that the projects are really, really interesting, really, really good, and secondly, most importantly, is because we know that the students we've got are fantastic, and we're really looking forward to seeing it. So knock this out the park completely, do a wickedly cool job of it, because it's what you're doing anyway, and yeah, we're looking forward to seeing you soon. Cheers.